Hello, welcome to the Teacher Channel. This video is about using the quotient rule for derivatives. Remember that a quotient is a fraction. You have a function in the numerator divided by another function in the denominator. So in calculus, to take the derivative of a quotient, which is the answer to a division problem, you have to use the quotient rule. And in this particular video, I'm calling the numerator h for high because we have to look up at the numerator and the denominator low because we have to look down below the fraction line for the denominator. So the numerator is high and the denominator is low. So let's look at what the quotient rule formula says. Low d high minus high d low over the square of what's below. You can sing this song to help you to remember the quotient rule formula. Low d high minus high d low over the square of what's below. Now let's look at some problems. Let's find the derivative with respect to x of x squared divided by e to the x. So what do? Well, we have h for high. What is high? What function is in the numerator? That would be x squared. Now we take the derivative of x squared, that's h prime. The derivative of x squared using the power rule is 2x. L for low is what is in the denominator, and that is e to the x. L prime, the derivative of e to the x, is always e to the x. Remember that e to the x is a special function that is always its own derivative. Now, what do? Low d high minus high d low over the square of what's below. So let's put y prime equals low d high minus high d low over the square of what's below. So it's always good practice to write down your formula when you're doing your work. This shows your teacher or your professor that you clearly understand the formula and how to proceed. So now we have things to substitute or plug in for h, h prime, l, and l prime. Plug them in. So in place of L, we put e to the x. H prime would be 2x minus h, which is x squared, and L prime, which is e to the x. Over in the denominator, e to the x quantity squared. Now we can simplify this. Notice in the numerator that we have a common factor of x times e to the x, and that would be in parentheses 2 minus x over e to the x quantity squared is e to the 2x. That's the product rule. You just multiply the exponents. X times 2 is 2x. Now, if you observe, what we can do is cancel. This e to the x cancels out one of the e to the x's in the denominator, so that leaves e to the x. And your final answer is just x times 2 minus x divided by e to the x. And that is the first derivative. Yay, very good. Now let's find the derivative with respect to x of x cubed over e to the x. You try this problem. Please pause the video and then restart the video to check your answer. Okay, we call h is what's in the numerator. That would be x cubed. The derivative h prime of x cubed would be 3x squared. By the power rule, low in the denominator, or L, is e to the x. And of course, the derivative of e to the x is e to the x. So now we can quote our formula. Low d high minus high d low over the square of what's below. Now we can just plug in what we have obtained. For L, that's e to the x. H prime is 3x squared. Minus high is x cubed. Derivative of the denominator, e to the x divided by L, e to the x quantity squared. Now we can simplify this. We have a common factor of x squared e to the x that we can factor out in the numerator, and that will leave us with 3 minus x in parentheses over e to the 2x power. Use the power rule to multiply x times 2. Now notice that e to the x in the numerator will cancel out one of the e to the x's in the denominator, and at least for our final answer, x squared times the quantity 3 minus x over e to the x. So if y equals sine x over cosine x, find y prime. Well, this is a quotient because you have the sine function in the numerator divided by the cosine function in the denominator. So we have to use the quotient rule. So the numerator is sine x. The denominator is cosine x. And the derivative of sine x is cosine x. The derivative of cosine x is negative sine x. Now, since this is a quotient, we just plug them in. And we quote our formula for the quotient rule. Low d high minus high d low over the square of what's below. So that's just plug them in. So L is cosine x. H prime is cosine x minus H is sine x. L prime is negative sine x. And this is over L, which is cosine x quantity squared. And we can simplify this. Cosine x times cosine x is cosine squared x. The opposite of sine x times negative sine x, two negatives make a positive. So it's positive sine squared x divided by cosine squared x. Now, if you remember your trigonometric identities, cosine squared x plus sine squared x equals 1. So I can replace the numerator with 1 over cosine squared x. And what is the reciprocal of cosine squared? That is secant squared x. So that is the derivative of sine x divided by cosine x. Please try this problem. If y equals cosine x over sine x, find y prime. Please pause the video and turn the video back on after you have an answer, or if you're unsure about how to proceed. Okay, first, what we have to do is identify the numerator as h, so that's cosine x. The denominator L is sine x. Now find the derivatives. H prime, derivative of cosine is negative sine x. The derivative of sine x is cosine x. Now we're ready to apply the quotient rule. Y prime equals low d high minus high d low over the square of what's below. So now, for the values of h prime, L, and L prime, plug them in, and simplify. So L is sine x, h prime is negative sine x, minus h is cosine x, and L prime is cosine x, over L, which is sine x, quantity squared. Now let's see what we get when we simplify that. So this is negative sine squared x minus cosine squared x in the numerator over sine squared x in the denominator. You can factor out a negative 1 in the numerator. That will give you negative parentheses sine squared x plus cosine squared x over sine squared x. That will equal negative 1 over sine squared x. And what is the reciprocal of sine squared? That is cosecant squared. But this would be negative cosecant squared x because the numerator is negative 1. So the derivative of cosine x over sine x is negative cosecant squared x. If you liked my video, please hit that subscribe button and feel free to leave any comments. Also, please hit that like button. Thank you.